Hi, thank you for inviting me to speak at this excellent event. My name's Janine Booth. I'm a member of the RMT Trade Union, and I'm also involved in the Free Our Unions campaign. So I'm going to speak for hopefully about 10 minutes on themes around workers' struggle, trade unionism, and climate justice. And in particular, I want to address political strikes, workers' alternatives, and political funds. Okay, so starting off with political strikes. NHS pay. I think the vast majority of working people in Britain are outraged at the idea of a pay freeze or, a 1% rise, which is pretty much the same thing for NHS staff, particularly after uh, the pandemic. Claps and being called heroes don't pay the bills. Better wages do. And I think that millions of workers across the country, across all different industries, would be prepared to strike for nurses, doctors, cleaners, other staff in the NHS to get a decent pay rise. However, that would be unlawful. Similarly, as the environmental movement grows, I think many workers would be willing to strike for radical, effective action to protect the climate. But guess what? That would also be unlawful. Under British anti-union laws, trade unions have to have what is called a bona fide trade dispute with their own employer in order to take lawful strike action or any other form of industrial action. In effect, that outlaws solidarity action with other workers and other unions, and it outlaws actions for what a court may deem to be political demands. So actually, here's a bit of an interesting angle on this. The law forces workers to act selfishly. You can only take industrial action to improve your own pay or your own working conditions. You can't do it to support anybody else. So it makes you act selfishly. And then when we do go on strike, guess what? We get denounced for being selfish by the same government that introduced these laws and by the media as well. So the first big issue there, I think, is ban on political strikes and solidarity strikes. It's really important that we fight to change that law, to free our unions from that restriction. But there are actually some bona fide trade disputes which do have wider political impacts, including on environmental issues. So, for example, public transport, where I work, private transport is one of the world's biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. In the UK and the USA and some other countries, the transport sector emits more greenhouse gases than any other sector. And globally, transport accounts for around a quarter of carbon dioxide emissions. And the UK government, going by UK government figures, if you travel on light rail or the London Underground, that will cause about a sixth of the pollution, of the emissions of an equivalent car journey. So because of this, I think battles by underground, rail and other public transport workers are in the interests of the fight to defend the climate. So, for example, the battles by rail workers to keep guards on trains, to oppose cuts to services, etc., deserves the support of environmental activists. As do the struggles of workers in other, what you might call green industries, such as wind farms. Strikes, industrial battles in those industries, they strengthen the position of those industries, they help them to grow and therefore to defend the environment. Even if those struggles are actually just about the pay and conditions of the people who work in them. Because I think they still boost the defence of public transport and green industries more generally, and because they challenge the notion that those industries should be run by the rule of profit, by the rule of balancing the books. However, even when a union does have a bona fide trade dispute with an employer, the law still ties us up in knots about calling any action. The law sets a huge amount of ridiculous, bureaucratic, petty hurdles that a union has to jump over in order to have a lawful ballot. And then to follow that with a lawful strike or any other form of industrial action. And just in case you thought there weren't enough anti-union laws already, The Conservative Party, in its 2019 manifesto, promised to introduce a new one. And this new one should be a particular concern to environmental activists because it's a law that says that there has to be a minimum service during transport strikes. So the Tories intend to bring in that new law at some point during this Parliament. And essentially what that law would do would be to force transport workers to scab on their own industrial action. It would require, even if we have a bona fide trade dispute, even if we jumped over all those hurdles that the law sets to us, we would still have to run some trains during a rail strike, run a service during another form of transport strike. We have to minimise the effect of our own action to comply with the law. So really important that we fight that law as well. However, you may already be asking yourself this question. Things are a little bit more tricky when it comes to strikes, worker struggles in defence of polluting industries. For example, airlines, fossil fuels, and so on. And I think we have to acknowledge that, of course, workers are going to want to defend their jobs and that we can't expect them to accept being thrown on the dole for the greater good of defending the planet. However, neither can we uncritically defend the persistence of climate damaging, climate destroying industries. So the alternative to both of those things, I think, is to encourage worker-led just transition. And what I mean by that is, instead of simply closing an industry or closing a production site, converting it under the supervision of the people who work there because they know best, converting it to something that is more environmentally friendly and that is socially useful, whether that be green energy, healthcare, or what have you. The model for this is in the Lucas Plan. So in 1976, the shop stewards at Lucas Aerospace, so Lucas Aerospace was threatening to cut a large number of jobs, and the shop stewards committee there, in response to that, developed through a wide engagement with workers, developed and produced an alternative corporate plan. And what that set out, what that advocated was using the capacity at factories that have previously been used to build, weapons, basically, to transition that, to use that capacity to build useful products, medical equipment, kidney dialysis machines, public transport vehicles, energy conservation technologies, etc. So the next thing I wanted to mention is political campaigning. The unions are tied up by a law that's over 100 years old, actually, which says that unions cannot spend, they're not allowed by law to spend money on political campaigning or political representation through their general funds, i.e. from the money that their members have willingly given them to be members. Instead, they can only spend it from a distinct and separate political fund, which members have to join separately. So this is the only money, it's the only pot of money that a trade union is legally allowed to use to, for example, campaign on environmental issues or sponsor political candidates who will champion climate-saving measures and workers' rights in Parliament or on their local council. So that's always been a restriction on trade unions. The Tories have progressively over the years made it more and more difficult even to pay into and to build that political fund. They introduced a law in the 80s saying there had to be a ballot of members every 10 years about whether to even have a political fund. What then happened is every time there was one of those ballots, over 90% of union members voted to keep their political fund. That upset the Tories, so they gave people the right to opt out of it. And now, with the 2016 Trade Union Act, they've made these funds opt-in. So workers now have to make a specific decision to join the political fund in addition to when they join the union. And that was with the deliberate intention, which unfortunately I think is working for them, of that lots of workers will just skip over that bit, not opt into the political fund, and the political fund therefore will shrink. So in conclusion, I think of the comments I've made about political strikes, industrial strikes, workers' alternatives, and political funds, is that trade unions are, trade unions, the workers' movement has enormous potential power to fight for a future society based on need, not on profit, and therefore a future society that is able to protect the planet rather than destroy it. But that huge power is chained up, it's shackled up in anti-trade union laws. So we have to fight those laws. However, we can still fight even while those laws are in place. So when we're strong enough, we can break those laws. But in the meantime, we need to campaign against them while not allowing the existence of these laws to demoralise us and to stop us from fighting back. I hope that that is a struggle where workers and environmental activists can unite. Thanks very much. Solidarity.